I'm Shelley Friend, co-creator of Iron Butterflies Project, and with me today is Caryn Sullivan, who is an attorney and a writer, and she just wrote a book called Bitter or Better. And I want to tell you a little bit about this, and I want to tell you a little bit about Caryn. This is the first of a three-part series with her. So first of all, thank you for spending time with us today. And I want to let everybody know that Caryn qualified as an Iron Butterfly as an 8-year-old girl. And since then, she's qualified for many years since then on other levels. First of all, she lost both of her parents to cancer by the age of 23. And then she spent nearly 2 years first seeking a diagnosis and then ultimately finding out that her daughter needed a bone marrow transplant for a very rare blood disease. Fortunately, she survived that and she's doing very well. So that's a wonderful blessing along the way. But if that isn't enough, Caryn also survived breast cancer, and then her husband died unexpectedly at the age of 54 from a heart attack. And now she is surviving and thriving and writing beautiful stories for us. And she's also learning ways to help her adult son thrive with autism. So thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your story.
Thank you for inviting me.
So the book is called Bitter or Better. So tell us, why choose better?
Well, I would say choose better because it's so much better than bitter.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the people who you know who are bitter. They're the lonely souls who go through life with a chip on their shoulder. We all know who they are. We avoid them because it takes enough to get through our own lives without having someone, sort of suck our energy out because they're so negative and, they lead with woe is me.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised by my mother with the philosophy that no one likes a victim.
Mm-hmm.
And life's not fair. And looking back on my life, she was foreshadowing, all the things that were to come.
Mm-hmm.
But my siblings and I all really grabbed onto that. And while they haven't had all of the experiences that I've had in my adult life, I think that those words really helped us and sort of made the other choice completely unacceptable.
So it's a choice for you. You can
Absolutely.
choose to be bitter or choose to be better. One of the things I love about this book is your use of language and how you color everything so beautifully. And one of the quotes that was very powerful to me was, "Trials that left stretch marks on my soul." And even if you have not delivered a baby, we all know, we can imagine what it feels like to have stretch marks on our soul. Besides that, one of the other powerful metaphors that you used was the metaphor of butterflies. And so tell us, if you would, a little bit about your chrysalis process.
Okay. So my butterfly moment at 8 came about because my mother ran off with a man she fell in love with, taking her 5 children and his 2 children out of the country for 2 years. And when we returned to the United States, they stayed together for a few years before they divorced. And then it was a few years after that that my mom passed away from cancer, and in the interim my father had died of cancer. So there was one thing after another. It was like a steady parade of things, and looking back, I realized that the way I coped with that was just by surrounding myself in an emotional cocoon, always sort of subconsciously waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just the way that I coped. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, when what has so far been probably the worst, it's all been really hard, but the worst was, when 15 days before Christmas, everyone was out of town except for our 15-year-old. My husband drove himself to the hospital and was surrounded by strangers when his heart gave out and they couldn't survive or revive him. And when I joined that freaking widows club, which I termed it, I realized that was the culmination of all of these things, and that truly could have taken me down. And so rather than becoming bitter, that experience sort of propelled me out of the cocoon.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a chance conversation with a priest 4 months after he died, where I related to him a lot of the things that had happened in my life. And at that point I was really grappling with, why my kids? They had such an engaged, loving dad. Why my family when everything else had happened to us prior to that? And his response was so powerful, I termed it my North Star. And it was very simply that, he couldn't explain why we'd had all this adversity, but he could offer, a very powerful message which was that in the face of adversity, we all have a choice. We can be bitter or we can be better. And I grabbed onto that. I love to have a framework, and that was like the most clear framework to me. I call it my North Star. I use that to evaluate so many of life's little and large problems, and I consciously work on living the choice to be better.
Well, and you are a perfect example of how to do this and how to live better. You've also had some miracles and some blessings along the way. And one of the most touching stories is the story of your son and your daughter during her process of healing, or prior to her process of healing and going through a bone marrow transplant. So will you tell us a little bit about the Mojo that they shared?
The Mojo. So you mentioned, the search for an answer. It was about 15 months after I had gone through my breast cancer treatment that my daughter, who had just finished fourth grade, just became, very lethargic and not herself. And my mother's instincts are very strong. And so I took her to doctor after doctor seeking an explanation, and had difficulty finding one. Ultimately persisted in a fabulous doctor in Minnesota. Spent some time doing some research, ran a test that showed that she had a very, very rare blood disorder. So we're told that her choice was to live with it and get periodic blood transfusions, be on drugs, have a low life expectancy, or to undergo a bone marrow transplant. And so she decided that she wanted to go through the bone marrow transplant. So I took her in with her brother to be tested. And we were returning from the clinic after they'd had their blood drawn, and he's walking along, and he's 13 at the time. He has autism. He's playing his handheld video game, and he looks up out of the corner of his eye and he says, "So, Julia, did they give you my Mojo yet?" And of course she responds with a, "Oh, Jack." Well, it was a couple months later that he did give her his Mojo. He was a perfectly matched donor, and as my sister-in-law Linda said at the time, which was so profound, many people search their whole life for their purpose. How fabulous for Jack that he was able to find his at such a young age. Because Julia did survive. It took a very long time, but she's in her 20s now. She's working. She went through college, and she's got a life because of her brother's Mojo.
That's great. Beautiful story. Well, in closing, we want to talk about one more thing before we close, and that is you write an article for the newspaper, and you also have a blog, and we'll talk more about the blog in the second video. But one of the things, one of the other examples of your beautiful use of language was that you talked about shards of hope. And so if you could give our readers a little bit about your shards of hope.
Well, the shards of hope are just those examples that we find along the way in life if we pay attention. I believe that we're all students and teachers in life if we choose to be. And if you're present and if you're watchful, you can see examples, like Jack giving Julia his Mojo. And because of the kinds of stories that I write about people navigating life's challenges. I write about resiliency, and the people who are successful offer hope to those who are struggling.
Well, thank you so much. And this book is called Bitter or Better. And if you want to reach Caryn, her information will also be at the bottom of her story that she's writing for Iron Butterflies Project. And her email is Caryn M. Sullivan, and she spells it Caryn msullivan.com. So please hug each other and let's fly forward together.